That's a whole PowerPoint.
All right, guys, let's get the meeting going. Yeah. Order the meeting of the Conservation, Sustainability, and Green Initiatives Committee for April 25th. Please take a roll.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Reinhardt?
Yep.
Epicoro?
Yep.
Misso?
Here.
Fine?
Here.
Lockhart?
Here.
Miller?
Present.
Plotsky? Present. Simpson?
Here.
Curley?
Here.
9 present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. First item of business is approving the previous meeting minutes.
Motion to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next item is the public hearing on proposed modifications to the agricultural districts numbers 2 and 3. And Laura is here.
Good evening. This is part of the annual agricultural district review process. 3 parcels were submitted for consideration for addition to the districts. 1 was withdrawn. 2 were found by the Ag Environment Protection Board to be consistent with the intent of the district program. It includes 1 106-acre sheep and vegetable farm in Rensselaersville, and 1 livestock operation in Queens that was partially in, but the parcel boundaries had changed to add additional 85 acres. That's a total of 191 acres proposed to be added.
Any questions? Matt, motion, is there a second? Okay, a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Thank you. Now the third item is being tabled
Withdrawn.
or withdrawn? Okay. Third item is withdrawn, the one on algae at Lawson Lake. Fourth item, authorizing agreements with Calibre, New York for the development of a solar array at 897 Waterville Shaker Road in the town of Colony.
All right, thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. You're stuck with me for the next 3 items, so off we go. We've been to the legislature many times related to this project, progressing to this point. Where we finally are today is authorizing a power purchase agreement, site lease, and pilot agreement with Calibre, which is basically the implementation arm of Siemens for the solar project at the, I'll call it the radar tower facility adjacent or in the vicinity of the airport. Apologies, for the new document coming in, we're finalizing putting the finishing touches on the numbers related to the pilot agreement, which feed into the PPA rate. But this is an exciting project for us. It's our first solar array of significant size. It is going to be power solely purchased by the county that will offset around 10 to 15% of our power use. It started as a bigger project and we had to scale it back for a few reasons, but still a substantial project as we look to green our operations and move down the path that's obviously a priority of the county executives and the legislature to make the county as sustainable as possible. county, meaning that the power purchase agreement rate that we are agreeing to pay to Calibrant will be more than offset over the 5-year term or 25-year term of the agreement by the credits that we receive back from New York State. So it's not a huge moneymaker, but it is a positive, a net positive financially, which is something that we set out at the beginning of this project to say was a priority, that we could both go green while having it be financially advantageous to the county. Beyond that, there's a lot in here, so I'm happy to answer any questions, but again, it's an exciting project for us.
Luke, can you explain this handout that we just got?
Yeah.
Where it looks like we haven't yet decided on these 3 reimbursement options or how we're gonna pay? Is that?
Yeah, I'm happy to explain it. So the, let me get to the right page here.
Well, it's this is the chart I'm looking at. I don't-
Yeah, if you go to the final page, which says April 25th, 2023, on it, the 2 big boxes at the bottom, net cash flow from meter, it says 0.13, and then the next one says 0.16, are our 2 options. One is a flat rate, and the other is an escalator, throughout the 25 years. The flat rate has a greater net present value to the county, which is the $234,000 cash flow to the county over the 25-year MPV. The escalator has a...
Wait, where does it give that net present value number that you just quoted?
The second, so if you look at page 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're looking at the bottom 2 columns there, which say with 350K prepayment, that is grant support that we received from the state to assist with the project.
Is that the NIPA?
That's the next agenda item, yeah, exactly. Those are our 2 options. The way we're asking for it today as we finalize the negotiations over the pilot is a not to exceed up to these numbers, meaning this is essentially the worst case scenario, are these net present values. Pending the finalization of the pilot agreements, they could improve slightly. So even at the worst case scenario, we're looking at a positive cash flow to the county, and we hope that it will get better as we conclude the pilot negotiations, likely this week, which is why we do need to move this item. There are some payments due to National Grid related to interconnection coming up that we need to make if we want to proceed with this project, so that's sort of why, preferably, we would have that completely finalized. We're very close. We're asking for that, not that essentially worst case scenario, and by the legislative meeting, we'll have that number locked in and have it exactly what that cash flow is.
Are we assuming in all of these scenarios that we're getting the 350 from NIPA?
We have, yeah, that's the next item on the agenda tonight is to accept the 350 from that.
Okay, so
That's been
that is
awarded.
reflected, even if it doesn't explicitly say so, like with one of these rates where we're paying the 12.65 cents.
It's reflected, you can see where it says on page 6, the 2 boxes say with 350K prepayment on page 6. Those, there's with and without, but we know we're obviously getting it, so the numbers that are reflected in the document are the with numbers.
All right. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
Just to better understand what I'm saying, are these, like when you say 2024 and you have these dollar amounts in bracket, is that when we are in the negative?
Black is positive.
Okay,
So depending on, again, how you structure it, there's a higher overall net present value to the county with the flat rate, but it's slightly more advantageous in the next few years to do the escalator, just because it starts lower and it escalates. So black is in the positive. And then the aggregate of that is what you see on page 6. And again, that's the
What
worst
is
case.
what's the negotiating goal? Is it to maximize net present value?
With Siemens or with the pilots? With Siemens, that's just our choice.
I mean,
I
with
think we
Siemens.
wanna maximize net present
from
value.
our perspective, as we're negotiating the rates, are we trying to maximize net present value, or?
I think yes. I think, between what we've analyzed and what NIPA, who's advising us on this, is recommending, there's better value in the county for the flat rate, but,
I actually tend to agree. That's what Bethlehem did when we had a PPA, and that was always the attitude we had at NYSERDA when we were negotiating any kind of repayments, is to look at the
tends to
long-term benefit.
pencil out better, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, is there any other questions? Oh, yes, Jeff, so.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Luke, just two questions. Can you, and I have not had a chance to look at it all over, but just a question. Could you comment on what the protocol or understanding would be in the event of decommissioning? What are the?
Yeah, so we negotiated with Siemens that they are contractually obligated to pay for the decommissioning. That is in the PPA agreement. So after 25 years, it calls specifically for them to be responsible to remove and to pay for that removal.
Do they have to put any bond up or any type of financial guarantee?
We did not do a bond for a few reasons. This is an entirely county offtake project. Every dollar that goes into the project comes back to us in paying for the project. So we could have asked for a bond, but then it would have come back at a higher PPA rate. We are obviously being the county, a responsible property owner. Siemens is a very established company with 150-year track record in deep pockets. I think if this were and you've got the NIPA component where they are ultimately involved in this as well. We're comfortable as it is. We did obviously put thought into that. If this were a brand new developer who could go bankrupt tomorrow, then maybe we'd feel different.
I think that's reasonable. And then just one other question, maybe for you or for the chairman or someone who knows a lot more about this than I do, but on page 6 in the construction and installation section, it talks about if it's determined that it cannot be, that the array cannot be or cannot or will not be connected to the system, it relieves Calibrant of the obligations under the contract, under their sole discretion as to whether or not it can. What would be a scenario?
You mean if it couldn't be interconnected?
If it couldn't be interconnected? What are those types of, given that it's at their sole discretion to determine that, what would be scenarios in which it might not be connected?
I can't really think of one right now, given the fact that Siemens has been studying it.
So we are through the interconnection process. That's what the upcoming payment is for, is to finalize that, but we've already made that. We've gone through that queue. I assume that's in there where if this were earlier stages and interconnection had not been, that process had not been completed, they obviously don't want to be on the hook for something out of their control, where if National Grid came back and said, either you can't interconnect or it's going to be $1 billion, they have the ability to walk
So
away.
we're
So
already
that's,
past that now.
we are, interconnection is finalized.
Great, thank you. That's all.
You know, Jeff, I want to comment on your first question about this issue of the decommissioning. That's standard practice now in solar farms to have that kind of language in there. The reality, I think, is that what's going to happen is, because it's been happening, panels keep getting more and more efficient. Like for the footprint of the panel, the output that was 200 watts 10 years ago is now 500 watts. I think what you're going to see is just like with conventional power plants, repowering of these facilities, where you're going to bring in new panels, maybe upgrade the electronics or something, and then you're going to have a field array that's producing more power than it did when it was first built. And much more power than at the last of the 25 years, because there's a natural degradation in how much output you get.
That makes sense.
So I think that's actually going to be the future. So the decommissioning is probably going to be moot, because we're still going to need power in 25 years if we manage to deal with climate sufficiently.
I was just hoping to see a provision that if there was a tree decommissioning, that they replant the black locust trees, but it really.
Invasive.
When you're in your eighth term. No, I think,
Is that it?
the one thing to add on the decommissioning is just that the cost of the recycling of the materials typically can offset all or most of that cost. Not that, we still insisted it be on them, however the money is come up with, but that typically helps.
I think this is obviously a lot of work and a great project, so I commend and congratulate you and the executive for the job well done.
Appreciate it.
I just have one friend, just from my understanding, there's a lot of documents with this one, obviously, because there's a lot to get through. There's one called Solar Project Site Lease Comments. I assume it's from your office, from the executive's office, comments on the lease?
That, it
From
might
March
be a
6th.
slightly dated backup material where we provided comments back to.
And they're just areas that were highlighted, is that the areas you guys have concerns about? And then assuming that
That's
you're
been
satisfied
updated.
with them?
Yeah, I'll send it over.
Okay.
All right, if there are no more comments, can we have a motion to move this?
Motion? Want to go around?
No, go ahead.
Okay, we got that? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, Luke, next one.
I'll make this one real quick. This is accepting the $350,000 grant in support of the project we just discussed.
Yep.
And thank you tonight.
So let me see, is there a problem with taking money from NIPA?
Motion.
Oh, is that a motion?
That's a motion.
Okay.
Second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That was easy. Okay. Finally, adopting rules and regulations for the Albany County Sustainable Technology and Green Energy, or STAGE Act program.
Let me get to my right page here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. As indicated in the title, we all worked together on passage last year of the STAGE Act, which called upon the Department of Economic Development to work in partnership to develop implementation regulations. That's what we're here today to adopt, to discuss. A couple of key provisions I can highlight. And I'll say from the outset, there's a lot of intentionality behind sort of the structures that are set up here. They were developed specifically by the county's attorney's office to stay within the bounds of the charter, the local law, as well as general municipal law. So there's one or two areas where you might say, oh, that looks a little clunky. It's intentional and it's essentially necessary the way it's been structured. But we do set up within these sort of the structure as well as the eligibility. Obviously, this is focused on green businesses. We talk about the eligible categories, the review process, which refines quite a bit from the law, but still leaves a little bit of flexibility for the Alliance to develop the application. But it does outline scoring criteria that focus on consistency with our county priorities, job creation or retention, size and scope of the project, viability, meaning, is it a brand new concept, pie in the sky, or is it a real project, as well as potential bonuses, point bonuses for a variety of categories such as MWBE, veteran, and other type businesses. It establishes criteria for grant amounts that are tied to the level of job creation. So there's 3 categories that set sort of the bounds for grant amounts, and then discretion will ultimately be up to the alliance and the committee to, within those bounds, set the appropriate grant amount. We talk about a 10-to-1 private sector investment, so all that means is, you know, if we're putting in $1 million, there has to be at least $10 million in private investment associated with the project. Economic impact statements completed for all substantial projects. So as we did with a project like Plug Power, requires that that analysis is done to calculate essentially the return on your investment through taxation, you know, new income tax, new property tax, and other sales tax, etc. Eligible uses, which is really pulled straight from Empire State Development's project eligible uses. And lastly, recapture provisions. So essentially calls on the alliance to develop a recapture policy up to the full amount of the awards if things don't go as anticipated. So just wanted to run through some of the high-level provisions, but happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, so.
I noticed there's a Stage Act committee. It says the director of Albany County Department of Economic Development shall convene the committee. So is the director of economic development responsible for appointing the committee?
No, I think it
Well,
outlines the committee members, management budget, comptroller, clerk, executive, and legislative representative.
Okay, each one of these offices appoints someone. Okay.
Either serves or appoints someone, yeah. So that's top of page 4.
Okay.
Lou? I actually have a comment about that. I think the legislature should have 2.
Second that.
I think either me as chair of this committee or a designee from this committee should also serve on it, because we're dealing with green stuff here. This is the Green Stuff Committee. And it seems to me that would be warranted, given, how the rest of the committee is comprised. I think the legislature should have 2, one whose background, like mine, would be the green stuff, but it could also be someone who's appointed from the committee. And then someone from economic development makes sense. But anyway, that's one of the thoughts I had when I was looking at this. Yeah.
I agree with you, Chairman, and I'm going to add to that. I think there should be someone either from the Legislative Black Caucus or a community member from an environmental justice community to really bring in that perspective of ensuring that we're addressing environmental justice issues.
I think that we can discuss the makeup. I think it is intended and important probably for it to be county representatives. I would ask that those conversations be able to be had, if possible, between now and the full meeting, and that if we can come to that agreement, that we'd be able to move forward with this in this cycle, just because we are in May almost, and have been obviously very excited about this program and would like to be able to begin implementing it in order to work on some of the projects that we're working on and sort of show its value for the future. So I can't make, obviously, make those decisions here at the table, but if there's a way to sort of move it contingent on the discussion about the committee membership, that would be appreciated.
And the majority office can reach out to the executive.
Okay. One other sort of related question. I'm not sure whether it is or not, but that's why I want to ask it right now. I had 4 comments on this. The first one that I've mentioned is this one about having another legislator on this committee. But a related question is, when I look at the members of the committee, and frankly, I think back to my days at NYSERDA, one of the issues that's gonna come up is the technical expertise on the committee when they're looking at these business proposals. There's gonna be, business knowledge, and there's also gonna be technology knowledge, which at NYSERDA, what we did is we brought in outside experts on whatever the topics were that we were gonna be evaluating. How would you plan to deal with technical issues on the proposals that we get? Are we gonna have any kind of outside reviewers who are gonna advise this committee, or how would we address those?
I think that the alliance is ultimately, just stepping back from the bigger picture, that the idea is that the alliance is going to perform the intake, review the applications, and really send a packaged product to the committee. So I think that is something that, again, this is first and foremost an economic development tool. It is focused on green businesses because that's a huge priority of the county executive, of the legislature. But it is, so there is a place for that, I think, and perhaps the alliance could partner with an entity to look at that, but we generally can tell we're dealing with offshore wind projects, we're dealing with green hydrogen projects. We have specialized knowledge in these industries from an economic development perspective, so I feel fairly comfortable with what we bring to the table. If, perhaps if there were a fringe proposal that is right on that border of whether it qualifies, we could bring in another entity to.
Yeah, I mean, at NYSERDA, we were dealing with innovation, so,
Yeah.
so the ways that the innovative business fails can be business, or it can be not actually understanding the market that they're trying to get into. And there are the technical issues of can you actually hit your technical targets that you say you're gonna hit with our NYSERDA support. So, I mean, I guess partly it is a question of when you look at a Plug Power case or a supply chain for the wind work at the port, those are people who are already in the business. They're already, they're proven themselves to a certain extent. But when you look at how the stage program could embrace newer companies, that's where I think the issue is a little bit bigger. Because now you're really talking about the kinds of companies that are new. We're going into new markets. Let's say it's new HVAC equipment or something that's part of that green revolution, but it's a newer enterprise.
I think if you frame it that way, and you're bringing in that type of knowledge to contribute to the review of a startup, then that makes sense. Obviously we're trying to have as clean a program, meaning not adding too many layers of complexity as possible. So I think on a case-by-case basis, that certainly would make sense. I think for the more established, likely bigger grants for existing industries, we're dealing with these industries now. They are highlighted in the regulations as well as the local law, and we feel comfortable with our expertise and capabilities because it's what we do every day.
As long as we have that flexibility, if we need to bring in some outside expertise, that we can do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would kind of be stupid to not do that if there's a perception that that's needed. The other question that I had of somewhat of a technical nature is somewhere in here, I think it's near the end of the 9 pages, it talks about the recapture benefits policy. This is under the section on recapture.
Yeah.
And I tried to find out where that policy was. I couldn't see it anywhere.
So that's something that this is going to call on the alliance to develop a policy for recapture.
Okay, so it actually
rather
doesn't
than-
exist yet.
Regulations, obviously, we want to fine tune, but have to establish every single detail, and projects differ, right? Like, we're dealing with offshore wind companies that have 3 to 4 year lead times before they would begin operation, right? So how do you set a recapture policy for that, where they're not gonna have any job creation or operation for 3 or 4 years, versus a different type of company that might be operating in day one, and making
Right.
sure there's some flexibility.
No, that's fine.
To, you know.
Basically, it doesn't exist yet. It's
It
gonna
doesn't
be,
exist
it's
yet,
gonna
we
be
wanna get it
developed as
right,
part of the,
so-
once the committee gets up and running.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. My last comment's a small one, I think. When I read this 9 pages, I thought I was finding little mistakes, grammar, spelling, plural, singular, things like that. Did anybody actually proofread this? Because it looks to me like there's some confusing language that could be clarified.
Yeah, I
If
think
it's
we'll make-
businesses or business, for example.
We'll make some clarifications. This was important to get this in this cycle.
I
But
thought that might be the
I
case. That's the good
certainly-
answer, because
Yeah.
somebody should like clarify it. And is that something that requires, we don't have to table for something like that. I mean, it's not a substantive change. It's
Right.
just like making sure that.
Yeah, the numbers line up and the,
Yeah, articles and
the
things.
verbiage, yep, no, 100%.
Okay, yeah, Tim.
I'm gonna, a couple things. One, just, I do think it's important, you know, I'm talking about the committee, mentioned environmental justice, and I want to just point out the fact, the CLCPA, which is mentioned in here, it really is made to target disadvantaged communities. And so I think it is important to have that perspective. For example, let's say there's an opportunity to replace some of the heavily polluting industries that are polluting low-income communities in this county with, you know, clean energy, where you can create jobs for people there, and as well as, you know, now protect people's health. You know, I think we want to be thinking in that kind of way, and it's important to have people with that perspective.
Yeah, if I could, just on that.
Yeah.
That is why we structured the grading the way we did, where there's potential for additional points in the scoring for not just MWBE companies, but also projects that take place in either an opportunity zone or a potential environmental justice area, so that you know, it's a balance. It still has to be, of course, a viable,
Yeah.
solid project, but that maybe it scores a small, a bit less on the job creation, but can be made up for with those points, just as a hypothetical. So that is something that we took into account in the way we put these together.
That's good. I'm happy to see that. My other question is part of what this Stage Act is going to do is to bring in grant funding as well? Will there be people looking, because with the Inflation Reduction Act,
Yeah.
with the CLCPA, the Environmental Bond Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure, well, there's a lot of potential funding
Yes.
available from the federal government and the state that maybe then could be redistributed towards, so is that?
Yeah, I think
Well,
we've certainly
exactly.
thought of it that way, where it could be used as leverage. Many of the state programs, you score better on your application if you have a local match, and if you have local investment. So like the Fast New York program, which is a shovel-ready site program that the state created last year, how much they'll give you is dependent on how much you put into the project. So this is, we view this as a tool to leverage those outside funds.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap here in terms of the funding opportunities.
Yeah.
Okay, so my only question really now is how do we deal with this desire on your part to have a negotiation about the staffing of the committee between now and, what's it, next week?
2 weeks.
2 weeks?
I think we can get right on it tomorrow. I think that, obviously, if we can't come to an agreement, you're ultimately, you know, the legislature has the final say on passage here, so I think we try to work towards that with, and, you know, I'm optimistic we can, if we can.
Jeff, did you have?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would agree with both your and Member Fine's comments about one member not being sufficient really to represent the legislature's interest, nor to reflect the diversity of a 35-member legislature. So I would very much support.
39.
30, what did I say, 35?
39.
Yeah. We're always looking to reduce, yeah, so I would very much support that. However, requiring or mandating that one of the members or some member of the legislature be a member of a particular group or a particular race, I think is not appropriate, nor would I think would withstand constitutional scrutiny if we required membership based on race. So I think that's more of an issue that is better dealt with at sort of the political caucus level as to who would best represent the various political interests of the parties, but so just.
Well, I want to ask council, is there any value in us deciding, like right now, the committee saying, not necessarily addressing every negotiating point, but saying, yeah, we think there should be 2 members or 3 members of the legislature on this committee, and have a vote on it, without saying who they are necessarily, but just that, is there any value in doing something like that, so that at least that's a.
Well, the legislature, the committee members cannot unilaterally change a submission from the executive. So you can make that recommendation to us and to the executive, and we can follow up as staff starting tomorrow. But it needs to be passed out as is. It can't be changed by the legislature.
But I think what we can do, we can make a recommendation here as a committee right now, and you take that as a recommendation to the
Exactly.
exec. Yeah.
Okay, so how do we want to phrase this recommendation? I mean, I understand, I think what Jeff is saying is we have to be careful about how we verbalize it, because we don't want to go against any laws or anything, but we do have a sense that we should have more representation. I hope the committee is in agreement with me that someone from this committee should have representation, because we are the Green Initiatives Committee. But do we, how far do we go with a recommendation that is not overly specific, but will get the sense of the committee for you when you're involved in that?
Well, I mean, everyone can honestly just email me afterward and let me know what their feelings are. It's not something that needs to be decided right now, because it's not binding on anyone. I mean, anything you recommend does not have to be accepted.
Mhm.
So we can certainly negotiate that further with the executive staff,
Okay.
but I don't think you need to designate now,
And they're
3,
being here,
4, whatever members, and
What's that?
one from each committee or whatever. That
I
doesn't
think,
need to be decided.
these guys have been sitting here with us, have heard the recommendations on the table, rather than formalizing it. We just let them go work out what they can work
Okay.
out.
I have no.
Okay.
I think
So-
they're clear
so-
about, I don't
so
think
you
anyone
have the-
disagrees
you
about
have
somebody from
those,
this committee, right?
Mhm.
We
Should
don't
have
need to
somebody on the
make a
committee for
formal
sure.
recommendation, but we're going to move this out of committee with discussion.
With the expectation that there will be negotiations prior to the legislative meeting, and the understanding that the legislature is the one that ultimately moves it forward or not.
So if we don't like it, we don't have to vote for it.
Well, it's probably best if you just take COCPA language, because it's kind of omnibus, it's not targeting too micro, but it's broad enough to include what you want to include, so since it's already passed at the state level, we can't run a file, so I suggest we use COCPA language for the inclusion of what was mentioned for like an LBC representative, or something that CLCPA targets for, areas that need to be considered.
Can you tell me what those acronyms stand for?
It's the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. It's-
Oh, okay.
And in there, it talks about serving underserved communities and
Yeah, no,
environmental
I
justice.
just wasn't picking up on the letters.
Disadvantage.
Too many
is
letters.
the term they use.
Yeah. All right. Motion to move this measure forward.
I'll motion.
Oh,
Vicky is a move, a second. Sam? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No? Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, yeah.
Motion.
Sam moves, Matt seconds. We're out of here.
Presumptive